I'm very glad there's a meeting, and I think the way this has been sequenced for the president's first months in office makes this timing absolutely perfect. President Trump has put real pressure on the Russians. That's why Putin's talking. There's a good reason that Joe Biden didn't get asked for a meeting with Vladimir Putin. He didn't need to. He could continue to roll. Putin knows that he's played out the string. He might try to stiff President Trump on Friday, 96 hours from now. I'd be very surprised because the cost to him, if he does that, will be extremely high.
So, yeah, the Putin's his string is run out. I mean, what could he possibly have in mind? Why would he say something like that is in complete contradiction to observed reality?
Well, it's deliberate fiction. But remember, the people that funded him are also funding President Trump and Lindsey Graham and others. In other words, the same cabal that wants to push us into major war with Iran is absolutely unconditionally committed to the destruction of Russia. So they're paying the bills. Why would he say anything else? It's all nonsense. It's a big lie. First of all, let's get something straight. President Putin did not ask for this meeting. This meeting came at the request of President Trump. Let's go back and understand that Mr. Witkoff, the real estate mogul, flew at Trump's request, and after Trump asked specifically for President Putin and his inner circle to meet with Mr. Witkoff, he said, "Look, I want this meeting." And obviously it was clear to the Russians that President Trump probably needs this meeting. Then we get all of these contradictory statements coming out of Trump. Well, this could be a territory swap, or this could be something else. Everything. This is a very hastily organized meeting that has no preparation behind it whatsoever from our side. Now, the Russians are prepared because, as President Putin has repeated over and over and over again, our position is clear. It's unambiguous. We went through this in June of 2024. We've been through it in June of 2025. How many times do we have to go through this? His position is clear. We're the ones that have simply insisted on Mission Impossible, which is the destruction of Russia and the removal of Putin. Now, have those aims changed? Well, I think they have. But has President Trump enunciated very clearly what our interests are? Simply saying that our interest is the destruction of the Russians in Ukraine and the loss of Crimea and Russia's perpetual sort of isolation in the world. Those aren't goals. Those aren't even attainable. They don't make any sense. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, what does President Trump really want? And the bad news is, I'm not sure he's sure. Now, what do I mean by that? If you go back and look at other summits that we held during the Cold War, go back before this in World War I, even a conference which was as flawed as Versailles was, there was enormous preparation. People brought out tons of maps. They studied the geography. They asked questions about the history. Where have the borders been in the past? What would borders make sense under these circumstances? I don't see any evidence that that's happened. Someone said it very well over in Great Britain. President Putin is the master of detail. He is steeped in all of this information. He spends all of his time studying carefully the maps, the battlefields, the statements, the logistical strengths and weaknesses, the equipment inventories, the missiles that are on hand. He knows us probably better than President Trump does in terms of what we have, what we can provide. He knows that we have very little that we can provide to the Ukrainians. Most of the stuff that's being promised, it will show up in a year, and they'll be lucky to get 17 minutes of air and missile defense out of it. So we know that. He knows that. So he's going to walk into the room armed with all of this information. What is President Trump coming in with? In other words, in Trump's words, what are his cards? What's he offering that would be remotely interesting to Putin? Now, lately we've heard two other things that are kind of interesting. Well, President Trump may try to cut a deal on the Arctic. Well, you can't cut a deal on the Arctic, President Trump, because you're not dealing exclusively with Russia. You've got Norwegians, you've got Canadians, the people in Denmark and in Greenland. I mean, there are all sorts of people, Japanese, that have interests in the Arctic. So if you're going to develop a treaty of some kind, that's fine. That's going to take months and lots of negotiation. So you're not going to get a deal on the Arctic. So if that's part of it, that's crazy. There is one area where there could be at least preliminary agreement on future discussions that could be useful to them and to us. That would be on nuclear weapons. We're the ones that walked away from the INF Treaty. We're the ones that have essentially thrown most of the arms control into the gutter. If we go forward and say, we've reconsidered, we'd like to reopen discussions on these treaties, and we think we may be able to come to an agreement or an arrangement that makes sense, I think the Russians would probably say, yes, on the nuclear level, we're prepared for discussions. But when it comes to Ukraine, what is there to discuss? We have never recognized Russia's legitimate national security interests in Ukraine. It's like saying it's none of our business who occupies New Brunswick in Canada, or pick an area, Ontario. Just because the Chinese or the Russians are building an army in Ontario, it's none of our affair. Same thing in Mexico. So where is the readiness to recognize Russia's legitimate national security interests? It's not there.
Well, as it turns out.
Beyond that, this is very important, Dan.
Yeah.
Let's assume they get into a discussion along the lines that President Trump is talking about, territorial borders, and this business of Ukraine doesn't have to join NATO. What does that mean? Is Ukraine going to be genuinely neutral? Who's going to guarantee the neutrality? If we've seen anything, we see a lot of evidence that President Trump exerts almost no command authority over NATO. Who the hell is listening to him? You've got Starmer in London that thinks he's running his own imperial adventure. Macron, who is off on his planet. Merz, who can't decide which way he wants to move. Who's leading? Who's in charge?
That's a great point.
I don't know what Trump can deliver on. Now, what Trump could do that I think would make infinite sense is that he could talk for whatever number of hours, listen carefully to the Russians, something he doesn't do. You really need to listen to the Russians, listen to what they say. And if you don't think you can deliver because you cannot deliver Zelensky and his criminal regime in Kiev, you can't deliver on the British or the French or the Germans, then what do? You emerge from this and say, we've had very useful discussions. And I'm glad that we had this opportunity to talk, because there are areas of agreement between me and President Putin. Unfortunately, my European allies will not support anything that I am likely to do. And under the circumstances, I've decided that it's time for us to disengage and get out and turn the future of Ukraine over to the Europeans, who, after all, live in Europe. We Americans do not. Now, is he going to do that? I don't think so. I think he'll just drag on and drag on and drag on without anything coming out of it. And then the problem for the Poles and the Slovaks and the Hungarians and Lithuanians, do you really want several 100,000 Russian troops on your border? Because that's where you're headed. It may seem unlikely now, but it shouldn't be viewed that way. That's not because the Russians want to go there, but they may feel compelled to do so. They may not see any alternative because no one is willing to talk with them. So my private hope is that the people in Central East Europe, and I just named them, Lithuanians may be hopeless. The hatred there for Russia is so bad. The memory of the Second World War is so strong. It may be impossible. But the Poles are not that way. Neither are the Slovaks, neither are the Hungarians. The Moldovans, who knows? The Romanians, absolutely not, except that we've manipulated their elections to keep the wrong people in power. And some say we're doing the same thing in Moldova. But the point is, those nations have to live with the outcome. They can step up and say, we've gone as far as we can with NATO, but we don't care to be in a state of permanent war with Russia.